The Galactic Xenobiology Institute's lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as 43 different species settled into their designated seating arrangements. The air recyclers worked overtime, mixing atmospheric preferences for creatures that had evolved under different suns, breathing different gases, and living in environments that would kill most others within minutes. Maya Chen sat in the front row, her simple cloth backpack looking primitive next to the crystalline data storage units and biomechanical learning interfaces her classmates carried. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and she wore standard-issue Academy coveralls that somehow managed to look both too large and too small on her compact human frame. The other students gave her a wide berth, not out of malice, but out of genuine fear. She was from Sol 3, Earth, the Deathworld. Professor Kethvar, a tall, graceful being with 4 arms and skin like polished silver, glided to the front of the lecture hall. Their species, the Velnari, were known throughout the galaxy for their intellectual prowess and their complete inability to understand why any rational being would choose to live somewhere that could kill them. Today, Professor Kethvar announced, their voice carrying perfectly through the hall's acoustic systems, we will be examining defensive mechanisms in hostile environments. Miss Chen has volunteered to provide a practical demonstration of survival techniques from her homeworld. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled students. Several of the more delicate species had already begun backing toward the exits. The Zephyrians, gossamer-winged beings who lived in gas-giant atmospheres, were practically vibrating with anxiety. Maya stood up slowly, her movement causing at least 6 different species to flinch involuntarily. She had learned, during her 3 months at the Institute, that sudden movements made her classmates nervous. Everything about her made them nervous, really. Her bone density, her muscle mass, the way she could function perfectly well in what they considered a radiation-heavy environment, the casual way she had mentioned growing up with predators that would hunt her for sport. Thanks, Professor, Maya said, her voice carrying clearly without amplification. Even the way humans projected their voices was unsettling to most galactic species. I thought we'd start with something simple today. She reached into her backpack and pulled out what looked like a simple metal canister. Several students immediately activated their personal shields. The Koroth delegation began a complex series of ritual gestures that their species used to ward off evil. This, Maya said, holding up the canister, is a standard emergency beacon from a human survival kit. It's designed to work in environments where electronic equipment fails. She pressed a small button on the side, and the device began emitting a steady, rhythmic pinging sound. The signal can penetrate through rock, metal, most energy fields, and will continue broadcasting for approximately 200 standard hours. She set the beacon down on the demonstration table. The pinging continued, steady and clear. Now, she continued, human survival doctrine assumes that any environment you find yourself in is actively trying to kill you. This isn't paranoia. It's just what Earth teaches you. So this beacon isn't just a beacon. She picked up the device and showed the class how the outer casing could be unscrewed. Inside was a compact bundle of components. The transmitter can be removed and used separately. The power cell can charge other devices or provide electrical current for starting fires. The outer casing becomes a cutting tool. She demonstrated how the edges of the metal casing had been sharpened. The internal wiring can be used as snares, tripwires, or emergency sutures. A Velnari student in the 3rd row raised 2 of their 4 arms. Miss Chen, you mentioned sutures. Are you implying that members of your species perform medical procedures on themselves? Well, yeah, Maya replied matter-of-factly. If you're bleeding out in the middle of nowhere, you can't exactly wait for a medic. Basic field surgery is part of standard human education. We learn it around the same age most species learn advanced mathematics. The classroom fell silent, except for the continued pinging of the beacon. Professor Kethvar's four eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep confusion in their species. Miss Chen, perhaps you could clarify what you mean by standard human education? Oh, sure. On Earth, kids start learning survival skills pretty early. Basic first aid, how to find clean water, which plants are edible, how to make fire without technology, basic weather prediction, self-defense, how to read animal behavior. She paused, noticing the expressions around the room. Is this not normal? A Koroth student, their rocky carapace gleaming under the lecture hall lights, spoke up. Miss Chen, the planet Koroth is considered one of the more challenging worlds in our sector. Our young are not permitted to travel alone outside our cities until they reach maturity at age 57. They undergo 12 years of intensive preparation. Huh? Maya said. What kind of preparation? Safety protocols, environmental hazard recognition, emergency communication procedures, proper interaction with automated safety systems. Maya nodded politely. That sounds really thorough. What about if the automated systems fail? The question seemed to genuinely confuse the Koroth student. Why would they fail? Well, lots of reasons. EMP bursts, system overloads, physical damage, software corruption, hostile interference. Maya ticked off possibilities on her fingers. On Earth, we kind of assume that if something can break, it will break, usually at the worst possible moment. She gestured to the beacon, still pinging steadily on the demonstration table. That's why this thing has 7 different failure modes built in. If the electronic transmitter breaks, there's a mechanical backup. If the power cell fails, you can generate electricity manually with the hand crank. If the signal can't penetrate whatever's blocking it, the outer casing contains a pyrotechnic charge for visual signals. A pyrotechnic charge? Professor Kethvar's voice had risen slightly. In a standard emergency beacon? Oh yeah, humans love redundancy. This thing also has a water purification system, a small medical kit, emergency food tablets, and She paused, suddenly realizing that perhaps she shouldn't mention all the features. Well, various other useful items. The silence in the room was now complete except for the beacon's steady rhythm. A student from the back row, a Zephyrian whose translucent wings were barely visible in the hall's lighting, spoke up in their species' characteristic whisper voice. Miss Chen, you carry weapons? Well, not weapons exactly, Maya said carefully. Tools, multi-use tools. Everything on Earth can be dangerous, so we make sure everything we carry can be helpful in multiple ways. It's just practical. She looked around the room and suddenly realized that her classmates weren't just nervous. They were terrified. The revelation that her simple emergency beacon contained what most of them would consider an arsenal of dangerous devices had not helped the situation. Look, she said, trying to sound reassuring. I know this stuff probably seems intense, but really, it's just normal human preparedness. We're not trying to be scary or anything. It's just that where we come from, being ready for trouble is how you stay alive long enough to learn anything else. Professor Kethvar's 4 arms were now folded in what Maya had learned was their species' equivalent of deep contemplation. Miss Chen, perhaps we should pause the demonstration here and... The professor's words were cut off by a sudden commotion from the middle section of the lecture hall. A tall figure stood up abruptly, metal gleaming in their grip. And Maya's entire body tensed in a way that made every survival instinct her classmates had never quite developed suddenly start screaming warnings. The blade was beautiful in its simplicity. Curved, gleaming, and approximately 30 centimeters of folded metal that caught the lecture hall's lighting and threw it back in sharp, dangerous angles. The student holding it was Jack Thor, a member of the Hegemony warrior caste, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with skin like burnished copper and muscles that spoke of generations bred for combat. Maya didn't move. The entire lecture hall erupted in chaos. Professor Kethvar began rapidly cycling through emergency protocols, their four arms moving in complex patterns as they activated security systems. Students scattered, some heading for exits, others diving under their seating arrangements. The Zephyrians simply vanished, their species' natural camouflage rendering them invisible when panicked. Maya remained exactly where she was, standing calmly next to the demonstration table, her emergency beacon continuing its steady pinging as if nothing unusual was happening. Jack Thor's species, the hegemony, had built an empire spanning 12 systems based on their warrior culture and their belief that strength was the only virtue worth pursuing. They were not known for their patience, their diplomacy, or their tolerance for beings they considered weak. They were especially not known for their appreciation of Deathworlders, who made them look soft by comparison. You, Jack Thor's voice rumbled across the chaos of the lecture hall, his blade pointing directly at Maya, have made a mockery of strength. You parade your world's dangers as if surviving them makes you worthy of respect. Maya tilted her head slightly, the way she might if she were trying to understand a particularly complex equation. I'm sorry. I think there might be some confusion. I wasn't parading anything. Professor Kethvar asked me to demonstrate some basic survival equipment. The blade didn't waver. Basic? You describe tools of war as if they were children's toys. You speak of violence and death as if they were lessons learned in school. Well, Maya said reasonably, they kind of were. We do learn this stuff in school. Around them, the chaos continued. Security protocols were clearly taking longer to activate than Professor Kethvar had anticipated. The remaining students who hadn't fled were pressed against the walls, as far from the confrontation as they could manage. Jack Thor's grip on the blade shifted, and Maya's eyes tracked the movement with the casual attention of someone noting which way the wind was blowing. You think your death world makes you superior. You think your survival makes you strong. No, Maya said, and for the first time her voice carried a note of something that made several nearby students take another step back. I think my death world made me practical. She gestured to the beacon, still pinging steadily. See, the thing about coming from a place that's trying to kill you is that you learn not to waste time on unnecessary risks. Fighting someone with a blade when you don't have to, that's unnecessary. Jack Thor's species had two hearts, both of which were now pumping combat stimulants through his system in preparation for battle. His vision was sharpening, his reflexes accelerating, his strength increasing. It was a biological response that had served his people well in countless conflicts. Maya reached into her pocket. The movement was so casual, so unstressed, that it took a moment for anyone to register what was happening. She pulled out what looked like a simple pen, clicked it once, and held it loosely in her right hand. The thing is, she continued conversationally, humans don't really do fair fights. We're not built for them. We're built for survival, which means we're built for winning. Jack Thor's blade rose higher, his warrior training demanding that he respond to the threat she represented, even though she seemed to be offering no resistance. Do you know what this is? Maya asked, holding up the pen-like device. It's a standard human writing implement, ink cartridge, titanium tip, polymer grip. Cost about half a credit to manufacture. She clicked it again, and there was a subtle change in the device's profile. But see, humans have this thing about redundancy. This isn't just a pen. The titanium tip extends to become a glass breaker. The ink cartridge contains a paralytic agent that can be deployed through the tip. The polymer grip contains a small explosive charge activated by a specific grip pattern and clicking sequence. The lecture hall had gone completely silent except for the beacon's pinging. Even the security systems seemed to have paused. The really interesting thing, Maya continued, is the delivery system. Humans have been throwing pointed objects accurately for about 40,000 years. We're really, really good at it. From this distance, I could put this through your primary eye before your nervous system could process the movement. Jack Thor's blade wavered slightly. His warrior culture had taught him to recognize threats, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that the small, calm human in front of him represented a level of danger he had never encountered. "But here's the thing," Maya said, and suddenly she was smiling. It wasn't a cruel smile or a threatening smile. It was the kind of smile someone might wear while explaining something obvious to a child. "I'm not going to do that." She clicked the pen again, returning it to its normal configuration, and put it back in her pocket. "You know why? Because this is a classroom, not a battlefield. And because fighting you wouldn't teach anyone anything useful. But mostly because you're not actually trying to hurt me." Jack Thor's grip on his blade shifted uncertainly. What? "You're not trying to hurt me," Maya repeated patiently. "If you were, you would have attacked already. Your species doesn't announce attacks. They just attack. This is something else." She gestured around the lecture hall, taking in the scattered students, the still cycling security systems, the general chaos. "This is you trying to understand something that doesn't make sense to you. Which is fine. Lots of things don't make sense until you get more information." The blade lowered slightly. "You speak as if you know my species. I know that hegemony warriors are trained from childhood in combat doctrine. I know that your attacks are swift, decisive, and usually fatal. I know that your culture values strength above all else." Maya's voice remained calm, educational. "I also know that you're here, at a xenobiology institute, learning about other species, which means you're curious about things that aren't part of your normal experience." She picked up the emergency beacon, still pinging steadily, and held it out toward him. "Want to see how the pyrotechnic charge works?" The offer was so unexpected, so completely at odds with the tension that had filled the room moments before, that Jack Thor actually took a step back. "You offer to share weapons technology?" "I'm offering to finish the lesson," Maya said. "That's what we were doing before this got complicated." Around them, students began cautiously emerging from their hiding places. Professor Kethvar's 4 arms had stopped their frantic cycling through emergency protocols and were now hanging motionless at their sides. Jack Thor looked at the blade in his hand, then at the small human standing calmly in front of him, then back at the blade. The contrast was so stark as to be almost absurd. By every measure his people used to judge such things, he should have been the dominant force in this encounter. He was larger, stronger, armed, and trained for combat from birth. But Maya Chen was still offering to show him how her emergency beacon worked, as if the last 5 minutes had been nothing more than a minor interruption in a routine academic demonstration. "I do not understand," he said finally. "That's okay," Maya replied. "Understanding is what we're here for." She clicked the safety release on the beacon's pyrotechnic system. "Now, this is going to be bright, so you might want to step back. On Earth, we use these to signal rescue aircraft, but they also work really well for startling predators or creating distractions." The blade in Jack Thor's hand seemed to have become very heavy. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he lowered it to his side. "The charge is small," Maya continued, completely focused on the lesson now. "But the light output is intense enough to be seen from orbit in clear conditions. The chemical mixture burns at about 3,000 degrees, so it'll melt through most materials if you need it to." She looked up at Jack Thor, who was still standing there with his blade at his side, looking like someone who had just discovered that everything he thought he understood about the universe was slightly wrong. "Ready?" she asked cheerfully, and then she triggered the charge. The brilliant flare lasted exactly 3 seconds and 37 milliseconds. When it faded, the lecture hall was filled with spots of dancing light across everyone's vision and the acrid smell of burning chemical compounds. Maya stood in the center of it all, completely unaffected, holding the now-dead beacon, as if she had just demonstrated how to operate a simple calculator. "And that," she said into the stunned silence, "is why human emergency kits always include eye protection." She pulled a pair of dark glasses from her pocket and held them up. Solar flares, volcanic eruptions, metallic ore deposits that reflect concentrated sunlight, chemical fires, electrical storms that can blind you permanently. She ticked off the reasons on her fingers. On Earth, if you can see it, there's probably a decent chance it's trying to damage your retinas. Jack Thor was blinking rapidly, his species' extra eyelids working overtime to clear the spots from his vision. The blade hung forgotten in his grip as he tried to process what had just happened. One moment he had been asserting the dominance of his warrior culture. The next, he had been watching a human calmly set off what amounted to a small, explosive device as if it were a perfectly normal teaching aid. Professor Kethvar approached slowly, their 4 eyes cycling through different visual spectrums to compensate for the afterburn. "Miss Chen, perhaps a warning next time before you deploy military-grade illumination devices in an enclosed space?" "Oh, this isn't military-grade," Maya said, sounding slightly confused. "This is just standard civilian equipment. Military-grade would be—" She paused, apparently realizing that this might not be the best time to explain what human military equipment was capable of. "Well, anyway, this is just what we give to kids when they go camping." A Velnari student, who had been hiding behind an overturned desk, slowly emerged, their silver skins still shimmering with stress patterns. "Miss Chen, you give explosive devices to your young?" "Well, yeah. How else would they signal for help if they got lost?" Maya looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "I mean, you can't rely on electronic communication in most Earth environments. Solar interference, magnetic fields, atmospheric disturbances, predator-generated electromagnetic pulses." "Predator-generated electromagnetic pulses?" Professor Kethvar's voice had risen to what, in their species, indicated profound disbelief. "Oh, sure. Electric rays, some of the bigger cephalopods, a few mammalian species that evolved near uranium deposits." Maya waved a hand dismissively. "Anyway, the point is that you can't count on your comm gear working, so you need backup systems." She gestured to the dead beacon. "Pyrotechnics, chemical markers, reflective signals, audio calls, physical trail markers. Humans usually carry at least 5 different ways to communicate distress, and most of them can double as defensive tools if necessary." The Koroth student, their rocky carapace still showing stress fractures from the earlier tension, spoke up hesitantly. "Miss Chen, when you say defensive tools—" "Non-lethal deterrents, mostly," Maya replied matter-of-factly. "Bright lights to confuse predators, loud noises to startle them, chemical irritants to encourage them to go find easier prey, physical barriers to slow them down." She reached into her backpack again, and half the class immediately took several steps backward. "It's okay," she said, noticing their reaction. "This is just a standard hiking multi-tool." What she pulled out looked like a simple folding knife, but as she began demonstrating its features, it became clear that simple was a relative term when applied to human engineering. Blade for cutting, obviously, saw for wood and bone. Awl for making holes in leather or other materials, scissors for precision cutting, wire strippers for electrical work, bottle opener, can opener, small ruler, tweezers, toothpick, each implement folded out from the main body with mechanical precision. Phillips head screwdriver, flathead screwdriver, small magnifying glass, LED light, compass, thermometer, and emergency whistle. The class stared in fascination as the simple knife revealed itself to be a compact engineering workshop. "The really nice thing about this model," Maya continued, "is that the handle contains a small emergency medical kit. Bandages, antiseptic, suture needles, painkillers, stimulants, and a small surgical blade." Jack Thor, who had finally managed to clear his vision enough to focus properly, found his voice. You carry surgery equipment as a matter of course? Well, you never know when you might need it, Maya said reasonably. What if someone gets injured and you're the only one around who can help? On Earth, we're taught that everyone is responsible for everyone else's survival because the environment sure isn't going to help. She folded the multi-tool closed and slipped it back into her pocket. I guess that's probably the biggest difference between humans and most other species. We don't really think of survival as an individual responsibility. It's a community effort. A Zephyrian materialized near the back of the room, their camouflage fading as their stress levels decreased. But Miss Chen, your survival equipment seems designed for individual use. Sure, but that's just practical redundancy, Maya explained. If everyone carries the tools needed to help themselves and others, then the group is more likely to survive even if some members are lost or incapacitated. It's like... She paused, searching for an analogy that would make sense to species that had never had to worry about their environment actively trying to kill them. It's like insurance, she said finally. You hope you never need it, but if you do need it, you really, really need it. Jack Thor had been standing silently through this explanation, his warrior training trying to process what he was learning about human society. Finally, he spoke. Your species arms its civilians more thoroughly than most worlds arm their military forces, he said slowly. Yet you claim this is for survival, not conquest. Maya looked at him with what might have been sympathy. Jack Thor, right? From the hegemony systems? He nodded stiffly. Your people conquered 12 worlds through military strength, Maya said. Which is impressive. Humans have lived on one world for their entire evolutionary history, and it nearly killed us about 6 different times. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, supervolcano events, magnetic pole reversals, gamma-ray bursts from nearby stellar events. She gestured around the lecture hall, taking in all the different species represented. Every other race in this room evolved on worlds that supported life. Humans evolved on a world that was actively trying to end it. So yeah, we're a little intense about backup plans. Professor Kethavar had been recording the entire exchange on their personal data storage unit, and now they stepped forward. Miss Chen, I believe what Jack Thor is struggling to understand is how a species that is so thoroughly prepared for violence can claim to be peaceful. Maya considered this question seriously. I think, she said slowly, it's because we learned early that the universe doesn't care about fair fights. It doesn't matter how strong you are or how advanced your technology is if a volcano decides to explode or an ice age decides to start. Strength isn't about being able to hurt others. It's about being able to protect the people you care about when everything goes wrong. She looked directly at Jack Thor. Your blade is beautiful, and I'm sure you're incredibly skilled with it, but it's a tool for fighting other people. Human tools are for fighting the universe itself. The warrior considered this for a long moment, then slowly sheathed his blade. I begin to understand, he said quietly. Your world taught you that everything is an enemy. Mine taught me that enemies must be defeated. Not enemies, Maya corrected gently. Challenges. Enemies want to hurt you personally. Challenges just are. You adapt to them, or they adapt you out of existence. She picked up her backpack and began packing her demonstration materials. The nice thing about challenges is that once you figure them out, you can usually help other people figure them out too. As the other students began to file out of the lecture hall, still murmuring among themselves about what they had witnessed, Jack Thor remained behind. He approached Maya's desk slowly, his massive frame moving with the careful deliberation his species used when they were uncertain about protocol. Miss Chen, he said formally, would you be willing to teach me about human survival techniques? Maya looked up from her packing and smiled. It was the same calm, friendly smile she had worn while explaining how her emergency beacon could be used as an improvised explosive device. Sure, she said. Class starts tomorrow at 0800. Bring something to take notes with. She shouldered her backpack and headed for the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Jack Thor? You might want to bring your own emergency kit. We'll be doing some practical exercises. As she disappeared down the corridor, Jack Thor found himself wondering exactly what constituted a practical exercise in human survival training. Something told him that his warrior caste education had not prepared him for what he was about to learn. Behind him, Professor Kethvar was still recording notes, their 4 arms moving in complex patterns as they tried to document everything they had observed. How did one properly categorize a species that treated potential weapons as educational aids and considered military-grade equipment to be appropriate for children? Perhaps, the professor mused, that was exactly the wrong question to ask. Perhaps the real question was, what kind of universe created beings who needed to be that prepared just to survive childhood? And perhaps more importantly, what else were humans capable of if this was what they considered normal? Outside in the corridor, Maya's emergency beacon gave one final fading ping before its power cell finally died, the sound echoing off the walls like a promise that help would always come, even in the darkest places.